Welcome to Focus on Gaza. I'm Imran Garda. Coming up on this week's program, Israel steps up interrogation of Gaza's patients. Scars of war. We're at an operating table as a doctor treats burn victims. And a prayer from Gaza. One Christian family shows us what life is like for them. This week, a UN inquiry accused Israel of gross negligence and recklessness in attacks on UN property in the Gaza Strip during the war earlier this year. Israeli officials rejected the report, calling it one-sided. Hamas held internal elections, and exiled member Khalid Mash'al has been re-elected as political head of the Palestinian group. Mahmoud al-Zahar and Khalil al-Haya, both senior leaders of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, were also elected. The quartet envoy Tony Blair has said that a new framework for Middle East peace talks may emerge in the coming weeks as Israeli and Palestinian leaders visit Washington. Israel's intensive strike on Gaza earlier this year left many residents in need of urgent medical treatment. Treatment simply not available in the Strip. Many attempt to leave, journeying to the Erez Crossing and hoping to make their way to Jerusalem. However, recent data collected by the group Physicians for Human Rights Israel alleges that Israeli security forces are denying Gazans urgent medical care unless they collaborate. Ayman Mohyeddin has more.
At the Erez Crossing into Gaza, a patient returns home, one of the few lucky ones allowed to receive treatment inside Israel. Ashraf Ghnaim has not been so fortunate. He was diagnosed with morbid obesity and required emergency surgery to help control his weight. The doctors said my first surgery failed and that I need to return immediately to the hospital in Israel for a second surgery, he tells me. But going back has not been so easy. On at least 5 different occasions over the past year, he has been summoned by doctors inside Israel for treatment. But all his attempts to cross were unsuccessful, as Israeli security services at Erez turned him away. The Israelis took me to a room underground, he told me, where they strip-searched me, took my picture, and interrogated me for hours. Ashraf's story is one of dozens highlighted in a recent report prepared by Physicians for Human Rights. In it, they detail the harassment Palestinian patients needing treatment inside Israel receive at the hands of Israel's security apparatus.
This is the Erez Crossing, one of just 2 outlets for the people of Gaza. For the sick patients seeking treatment inside Israel, it is through this terminal that they must pass. And it's at this terminal that human rights organizations say more and more vulnerable patients are being coerced into spying for Israel.
According to the Physicians for Human Rights report, in January 2009, shortly after Israel's war on Gaza ended, 17% of those seeking medical permits for treatment in Israel were interrogated, a sharp increase from the year before. The report also called attention to an increase in the interrogation of children by the Israelis, as well as a noticeable drop in patient care for those waiting to cross. Denial of medical treatment for refusing to cooperate with Israeli interrogators could constitute a contravention of international humanitarian law. Saeed Abu Shamala says Israel tried to recruit his sick brother Khalid as an informant when he applied for a permit to receive critical medical treatment inside Israel. They told him if he wanted to get treatment inside Israel, he would have to tell them where any leaders of the Palestinian factions, particularly Hamas leaders, were located in the neighborhood, he told me. Khalid refused to spy for Israel. His brother believes that's why his application was rejected. Khalid died last October. A painful reminder that for many Gazans, the balance between who gets treatment and who doesn't, between life and death, rests with Israel. Ayman Mohyeddin, Jazeera, Gaza.
Well, with me to discuss this is our correspondent in Gaza, Ayman Mohyeddin. Ayman, interesting reports over there. How well documented is this, and how do we know that all of these patients' reports and testimonies are authentic?
Well, Imran, the patients that travel from Gaza into Israel, their cases are very well documented on several fronts, primarily by several medical organizations. There are accounts, obviously, by the organizations that sponsor these patients, by the hospitals in Israel, by those that are actually footing the bill for that medical treatment. So they know the number or the volume of patients that are crossing from Gaza into Israel. That is very well documented, and the numbers are very transparent to everyone. But what makes their accounts so reliable are the independent testimonies of so many different types of people, and that is all the patients that cross there substantiate and corroborate their own accounts independently, and that is when human rights organizations come and speak to these patients, they all give them very similar accounts of the way they are treated, and that information, by the volume of patients that is crossing, seems to make it very, very reliable. Human rights organizations that operate in Gaza are continuously carrying out these types of surveys and inquiries into the way patients are treated. So it is a very transparent process, at least from the patient's perspective. And then once they go through that process, they give the accounts of how the Israelis treated them. And on more than one occasion, these accounts are very similar. And that is why human rights organizations believe that there is indeed a pattern by which patients are continuously interrogated, harassed, and sometimes coerced into spying for Israel.
And what does this do to the Palestinians psychologically in the way they view each other, this culture of suspicion? It almost seems as if it's divide and conquer by Israel.
Absolutely. In fact, there are two primary groupings of people within Palestinian society that in recent months have been stigmatized because of the possibility of them being coerced, and that is the patients that cross from Gaza into Israel for treatment and Palestinian fishermen. Now, human rights groups say that these two groupings of people are the most vulnerable because they come into contact directly with Israelis. The fishermen that are out at sea are constantly harassed by Israeli naval vessels. They are regularly detained, and so they come in direct contact with the Israeli military. It's the same for the people that pass directly from Gaza into Israel for treatment. And so that carries with it a cloud of suspicion that hangs over the heads of many of these fishermen and patients. And when they return to their societies, when they return back to their communities, there's oftentimes a negative stigma that if they did indeed cross over into Israel, that or they did indeed were detained by the Israeli Navy and military, that they could have possibly been coerced into spying. And certainly in Gaza, anyone that is suspected of collaborating or spying with Israel certainly carries a very negative image and subsequently for their families and for their communities. So it is a very divisive tactic and tool, but it is also an element of the kind of psychological power that Israel exerts over the civilian population here, Imran.
At the very top of the program, we mentioned that Israel has rejected that UN inquiry into hitting UN installations during the war. We chatted a lot over the airwaves during the war. You were in Gaza as the bombs were falling on the Strip. Israel's basically absolved itself of any blame and said that this inquiry was one-sided. How have Palestinians in Gaza responded to Israel just dismissing this?
Well, Imran, they look at the report as another damning indictment of how Israel has conducted its war and its 23-day bombardment and invasion of the Gaza Strip. In fact, this particular report was very significant because it was conducted by the United Nations looking only at the UN facilities and damage to UN property. And there are about 300 UN facilities throughout Gaza. 56 of those were damaged in the war, at least affected in the war. 9 of those were investigated for this report. So Palestinians look at this as yet another damning indictment against how Israel carried out the war. But what's so significant about this, and something that the Palestinians certainly we're glad to see, is that the United Nations, at least this administrative arm within the UN, calling for reparations to be paid, calling for the damage that was carried out to be reimbursed to the United Nations in the excess of $10 million. So they want to see the growing momentum of these types of reports. And let's not forget that there is several UN reports that have come out. There have been reports by human rights organizations, and there have been the testimonies of Israeli soldiers themselves in terms of the kind of possible abuses and allegations of war crimes that may have taken place here in Gaza. What the Palestinian people want to see and what they keep telling us is, it's great that these reports come out, that they document the atrocities, but at the end of the day, there has to be some kind of mechanism for justice. There has to be some kind of mechanism to punish the Israeli soldiers, the Israeli government that carried that out. But by the very same breath, they will tell you they are not hopeful that will take place because of political considerations, Imran.
As always, terrific work in Gaza. Ayman Mohyeddin, thanks a lot for that. Coming up after the break, we meet with Gaza's senior burns surgeon. And a Catholic family talks to us about trying to sneak a peek of the pontiff.